Hello everybody, I'm Liz Bentley, I'm Chief Executive at the Royal Meteorological Society. We've got a panel discussion to look at fellowship and professional accreditation in meteorology. So I'm going to chair the panel, and I'm going to start by introducing the panel. I've got the slide up here, and then I'll close the slide and introduce the rest of the panel with their cameras on. So if we start top left, I've got Sarah Hewitt, who is from the Met Office, and Sarah will say a bit about herself in a minute. I've got Rich Watsham, who is Royal Navy, Simon Bevan, who's Fleetweather, Laura Tobin, who is ITV, Good Morning Britain. A lot of you will recognise Laura. Steve Dorling, who is at the University of East Anglia and involved with Weatherquest, private weather service provider organisation. And I'm going to start actually with Sharon Stevens, who you will have seen on our presentation when we were going through. So Sharon's a colleague of mine, and Sharon's going to start, I think, by giving us a bit of an overview of the work of the Royal Meteorological Society around fellowship and accreditation, and then I'll move on to the other panel members so they can introduce themselves. Over to you, Sharon.
Thank you very much, Liz, and a good afternoon to everybody, and thank you for staying with us. So I thought I'd just spend the next sort of 2 to 3 minutes providing a really quick overview of the two professional accreditation schemes and also fellowship, and the role the Society plays in terms of supporting that. So when someone starts to think or maybe will put in an application for their professional accreditation, we take them through a process whereby we look at their experiences, their skills and their academic attainment, and we assess this against a list of competencies that have been benchmarked to international standards. And on successful achievement of that, you get to carry post-nominal letters after your name, and this immediately gives recognition for a level of professional competence that you've not only attained, but it's been independently assessed by a body such as us, the Royal Society. We've got about 1,500 members who sit in either fellowship, chartered meteorologist or registered meteorologist membership levels. And if I start with fellowship, it's our highest level. We relaunched it last year to a much broader reach. We had 29 new fellows join us last year, and we were absolutely delighted with that. Moving on to chartered meteorologist, which has the postnom CMet, and I should have mentioned that fellow is FRMetS after your name. Chartered meteorologist has been around since 1994, so it's 30 years, well established and a really recognised and also respected scheme. Our CMets have demonstrated outstanding performance in their chosen field, and we're just really excited to be seeing more and more people certainly look at if whether or not they qualify. Typically, you've built up experience over about 5 years is our guidance that we would suggest. And then finally, with our registered meteorologist, which has the postnoms RMet, we see this very much as like an entry level, not only to support your own career development, but also as a stepping stone to perhaps working towards the CMet as well. And that's also been around quite a long time, since about 2014 now. If anybody is interested in either finding out any more about this, or maybe they're in a position where they think, actually, yeah, I do want to make an application, then we have got a lot of information, support and guidance that we can share with you. I'd obviously point you straight to the website. We've got dedicated pages, not only for professional accreditation, but fellowship. But in addition to that, please feel free to contact either myself directly or a member of the team. Our details are on the website, because we've got a lot more information that we can share, including mentoring, some how to access our online CPD recording tool videos. So there is a lot of help and support. It's not like you're starting on a blank piece of paper. So I'm going to stop there and hand back to Liz. But yeah, thank you very much, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Sharon. Okay, so I'm going to start with who's first on my top left, and it's Simon Bevan from Fleetweather. And I'm just going to ask each of the panel members just to say a few words about themselves in the context, I guess, of fellowship and professional accreditation in meteorology. So over to you, Simon.
First of all, I suppose sound check. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me on the panel. I'm Simon Bevan. I'm an ex-Royal Navy METOC, so similar background to what Rich Watson will describe. Effectively 30 years in the Navy, been there, seen there, done it, been in command of various global weather operations, etc. I left the Navy 10 years ago to start my own business, and have been basically involved in ship routing and ship and marine weather forecasting for about the last 10 years. I'm sat on this panel because a British company bought Fleetweather a couple of years ago, and I've introduced a training program, a training and development program, basically from a youngster straight out of university to ultimately to someone to be achieving a CMet qualification. And in line with that program, we've approached a number of institutions and ended up going with the Royal Meteorological Society to basically get our whole workforce accredited. So that's the reason for the panel, and so I'll take questions on that later.
Thanks, Simon. Okay, I'll move on to Laura next, please.
Hi, afternoon, everybody. Well, my background in weather was, I was new at 14. I wanted to be a weather forecaster and phoned the Met Office and found out how to do A-level maths and physics. And then was lucky enough to get straight into the Met Office, the forecast training course. I spent, I think, 5 years at Fry's, about 5 years at the BBC, and now I'm at ITV, and I've been here for 8 years, I think 9 years this coming September. I guess the difference with each of the workplaces I've been within a team. So, when I was at the Met Office, I was in a team of weather forecasters at my RAF base, and the same at the BBC Weather Centre. But where I am now, I'm very much surrounded by journalists, and sometimes feel like you're a little bit out on your own, trying to sell the word of weather and talk about climate change, which is increasingly happening. So for me, having the fellowship definitely helps me to feel more involved in things that are going on, and it's been really helpful.
Thanks, Laura. So next on my screen is Stephen Dorling.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me this afternoon. Great to see lots of names and faces of friends and colleagues over the years. Great to join you. I'm Steve Dorling. I've been Professor of Meteorology at the University of East Anglia. I began there in 1994 as a lecturer, and I applied for the CMet accreditation in 1997. And I have to say it's been so helpful to me as a reflective tool, just for personal reasons, to gather together really valuable feelings about what achievements have been over the previous year. It's always been helpful in that regard, and I hope to say something more about that later. But in my other life, I helped to run Weatherquest Limited, a weather service provider. And within the last year, we've joined the society as a company member. And we've also introduced and required all of our staff this year to begin the RMet process. So from the employer's perspective, I'm looking at it from that angle as well.
Great, thanks, Steve. So next I've got Sarah.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Hewitt. I work for the Met Office currently as Private Secretary to the Chief Executive, but my background is I started in the Met Office as a weather forecaster, then worked in our college doing a little bit of training for a while, and then more recently I've worked in our more customer facing areas. And so for me, gaining chartered meteorological status was around being able to talk to people who don't understand the level of detail of meteorology, but recognizing that I had a basis with which I could speak to them about, because they don't know about the qualifications you have to go through to be a weather forecaster, whereas a chartered status is quite common across lots of different disciplines. So it was a good way for me to be able to kind of demonstrate my authority to be able to talk about some of these things. And from a Met Office perspective, we really value the kind of professional benchmarking that comes along with accreditation, and alongside that the focus on learning and development, and the emphasis on trying to maintain currency and maintain learning and development through that.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And finally, Rich.
Hello. So my name is Rich Watsham. I'm currently the Senior Meteorologist and Oceanographer down at RMetS Caldrose in the very far southwest of Cornwall. I have background. I started my environmental science journey studying oceanography at Bangor University in North Wales, which intrinsically sort of led me towards a start off as a civil servant at the UKHO, where I became an analyst for defence there in oceanography, and actually that's where I started dealing with more climate-based climatology and climatological analysis. I joined the Navy as a warfare officer back in 2008, and in 2010 I trained as a hydrographer, meteorologist and oceanographer, because we lumped them all together in the Royal Navy. So my focus of my career after that really was operational forecasting, operational science in effect, and how to gain tactical advantage from that. So I've been very fortunate to practice my sort of environmental disciplines as far as Asia, right through to the Indian Ocean, the Gulf, Mediterranean, and across the east coast of the States. So I got my RMet status and my assessment done on HMS Queen Elizabeth in 2017, just after we brought her out of build. I was part of the inaugural forecasting team on board her. And slowly over the years afterwards, I've got more involved with the society. And now, as I said, now I'm leading a team of 20 forecasters down in Caldrose, and really keen to get them improving their CPD and looking outside of the Navy for best practice as opposed to inside the Navy.
Great, thanks, Rich. Okay, so you've met the panel, and you can see there's a variety of backgrounds. Some members of the panel have a kind of personal interest in fellowship and accreditation. Some have it more from an organisational perspective, and some for both. So you get a feel for the kind of background. So if you've got any questions for the panel, please feel free to type them in the chat, and we'll get round to take as many questions as we can. And while I'm waiting for some questions to come, I wanted to just kind of put some, I guess, discussion points out there for the panel. And we're going to start with a question around whether professional accreditation in meteorology should be mandatory. So we're all aware professional accreditation in other sectors such as medicine or accountancy is a mandatory requirement. So I just welcome the views of the panel on whether professional accreditation should be mandatory for the meteorological sector. And I'll start with Simon, if I can.
Thanks, Liz. As a commercial company that's trading out there in a very wide competitive global market, one needs to deliver services to really an agreed standard. And one of the ways, and what's also important in terms of a global market is equivalency across different countries, different boundaries, regulations and rules, which are increasingly becoming sort of manipulated or certainly brought together by single bodies like, for arguments, the WMO. And the IMO in terms of the marine side. So it's important for a company that wants to go out there and trade that you can demonstrate that you can deliver services and products to an agreed standard. And that standard, of course, is delivered by experts and normally externally to your system. So accreditation was the road to go down for Fleetweather. At the same time, we developed this training program that really does take people straight out of university, and you've got to go through a number of hoops to get to the end. And in terms of that accreditation, we looked wide to find an institution that would get us accredited. Everyone does the meteorology. We also focus on obviously marine meteorology. And then the third element is something called ship routing, which sits on top of marine forecasting. There is generally, you can get accreditation for the first two, but there's no one out there that currently gives accreditation for ship routing as a specific skill set. So when we approached RMetS, we actually gave them a list of these are the competencies that you need to be a marine router, which you accepted. And of course, that then became, I think it was the 50th subcategory meteorological sub-expert area. So to us, it was a no-brainer. We were looking for a global brand with expertise. So we came to RMetS. You then agreed to the marine forecaster and ship router competencies, and the rest is history. We've got an internal house training program that can deliver people all the way up to be a chartered meteorologist with a marine router skill set.
Great, thank you, Simon. Sarah, do you want to touch on this next?
Yeah, so I come at this from a slightly different angle in that I would be slightly concerned about having mandatory use of accreditation, if only because I think that accreditation is brilliant for its wide inclusiveness of the various different specialisms that you can have. So I have one of my specialisms is around communication with stakeholders, communication with government in particular, because of some of the experiences I've had around working with select committees and working with Parliament. But there are other people in our organisation who, such as our operational meteorologists and our chief forecasters, who also holds chartered meteorologist status as well. And so I wouldn't want anyone to think that I can do their job. Because whilst I do have that operational background, my operational background is not quite the same as theirs, and my specialism is very different to theirs, even though I do maintain a level of knowledge and currency around forecasting, because that was one of my specialisms. But I think that one of the brilliant things about CMet and RMetS is the fact that it does recognise all the different roles that you can play within the weather industry and within weather in general. But I would fear that mandating some form of accreditation would somehow narrow that band and would make people think that they can only apply for it if they are a chief or a operational meteorologist or someone who's working in a specific set of areas.
No, good point. Thank you, Sarah. Laura, I don't know if you want to come in at this point. So I guess as broadcast meteorologists, if we look to the US model, then you've got, certification for broadcast meteorologists in the US that is pretty much mandatory. It's a requirement if you want to move into that industry. And I just wondered what your view was about something like that in the UK.
Well, you're exactly right. And that's what is really interesting, that in America, most of the broadcasters who are weather presenters, as we call ourselves, are accredited. But actually, you have to also look at the terms that they use. I am a weather presenter. Even though I am a meteorologist, I'm never seen as a meteorologist. And in America, they are all seen as meteorologists. So I think already the use of language around people who present the weather on TV perhaps isn't given the recognition it deserves there, first and foremost. And the same as Sarah was saying, of course, if you have an accreditation, if you have the RMet or the CMet, then it shows your employer and it shows the public that you have this level playing field, that you are with everybody else. But at the same time, I'm a meteorologist, but I'm also a presenter. And it doesn't mean that there are people who are weather presenters on TV who didn't have necessarily a degree in meteorology, that they don't carry the same level of gravitas and competency that I do. Because some people, I had to train to be a presenter. That wasn't something that came naturally to me. Communicating climate and weather and science is really, really difficult. So it's almost like it needs to have something tagged onto it, or another level of it, because yes, you can be a fantastic weather presenter. It doesn't mean that a weather forecaster doesn't mean you can present the weather. You could be a fantastic weather presenter, but it doesn't mean that you can present the weather. So I think to make it a blanket across the whole of broadcasting would be very difficult and wouldn't recognise everyone else's extra skill sets and talents. But at the same time, I'm certain that if you were to go for a job role and there were two people who had almost the same background, almost the same abilities, and their show reels looked the same, but one had a CMet and RMet and the other one didn't, I'm sure that would go to some way for an employer to think, well, maybe we'll choose them.
Thanks, Laura. I guess let's pose that question to Steve then. If you had two people applying for a job at Weatherquest, Steve, and one had a chartered or a registered meteorologist and the other didn't, would that swing it for you? And what's your view on the making accreditation mandatory for the sector?
Thanks, Liz. I'd be very impressed if somebody applied for a role at Weatherquest with an RMet or a CMet accreditation. That would tell me a lot, I think, about them as an individual, being reflective, recognising their own qualities and skills, and being able to communicate those. So I would be mighty impressed, but I wouldn't make it mandatory. I would say, however, that there are many different drivers for accreditation, positive ones. And those drivers are different for different people. So there isn't one single one that applies in each situation. And I'd just like to mention a few of them. I think they're fairly obvious, but one is from the employer's perspective. It's great to encourage your staff to develop and to record their competencies and so forth. That's really, really important. And that's why Weatherquest has joined the Society as a company this year and is encouraging all forecast staff to gain that RMet qualification. I think from the weather service users' perspective, our clients, they aren't specifically asking for RMet or CMet, but they're asking for competence. Mm-hmm. And how can we demonstrate competence? And the society schemes are really, really helpful as a framework for demonstrating that. So I think that that's also crucial. But, you know, I come back to the number one reason, I think, for being involved in this, which is the personal one, that mandatory for who is a good question. And I think it should be mandatory for yourself. And it's really important to protect quality time, to reflect on what you've achieved, to remember what you've achieved. Busy lives, we all focus on challenges and problems, but it's really good to reflect on successes as well. And so from a mental health point of view, I would just encourage it and say it should be mandatory for yourself.
Thanks, Steve. A really good point. Finally, Rich, I don't know if you want to cover off this from I guess a Royal Navy perspective, and I guess it's a bit more difficult thinking about it across the sector, but certainly within the world of the Navy, you know, is this something that could become more mandatory for people moving through?
So I think Liz, as we look at the journey the Navy's been through recently, which is aligning more and more with civilian industry, it's an absolute opportunity, and I'm trying to steer my cadre of people down this route. But do I think it should be mandatory? It's interesting. So WMO mandates that we have to maintain CPD to stay as aviation forecasters, and effectively to achieve that, we do at the moment, we manage our CPD centrally, so at the air station. So I've been on it this morning, my list of CPD for the whole of my team, so that I can ensure that they're maintaining a standard. Well, I don't think I should be the one that's ensuring that they maintain the standard. I think it should be, as we've said here, I think the onus on the individual to achieve the standard and for their professional credibility. But what is great is actually having peers review that continual professional development. And I think that's the element that really sets it above the rest. It's somebody else looking at your annually, looking at what you've done and saying, yeah, you're achieving a good level of CPD here. You are professionally competent. I don't think it needs to be mandatory, but I think it should be advisory. And I think for my organisation, it really is an absolute win to be able to actually manage that centrally through the RMet Society.
Thanks, Rich. I'm just going to move to some of the questions that are appearing in the chat, if I can. So the first one, it is to those with who run commercial organisations, so I guess Simon and Stephen in particular, but there may be a view from the other panel members. But whether you see there's value in setting accreditation as a key qualification to a new employee. And again, I'm probably going to start with you, Simon. I think you picked up on this already, that, you know, it was something that you take somebody straight out of university and put them straight through this system. So I don't know if you want to start with that one.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what we have done. I think at the end of the day, we have stipulated that everyone that joins the company and wants to end up being a marine router has to follow this pretty rigid road, and at the end of which the training is linked all the way up in terms of a command structure or a career profile, however you want to look at it. So if you want to get to be a watch leader, you know, you've got to have got to the point of being an RMet, and et cetera, et cetera. And there are lots of reasons for doing it. The main one being that you've got a very easy way of demonstrating to your clients and customers, that whoever they are, that you can deliver services to an agreed standard that's internationally recognised, and et cetera. It's another way of differentiating the company out there in a very busy marketplace. Actually, what we have found since we stipulated that this is a rigid program once you join the company, we're actually finding it's attracting recruiters much more easily than before. So although I do get the points about it's up to the individual, The fact is that we've laid out a nice program that's quite easy to follow. It just requires effort from the individual to get there. So whether that individual wishes to put a lot of effort in there and get there soon, or do it over a steady 15-year program, that's entirely up to them. But nonetheless, we've laid out the program, and that's how really we wish to play ourselves in the market, really.
Steve, I don't know if you want to add to that from the point of view of Weatherquest.
Yeah, I think the reason we've joined this year into the RMet program is because we are strongly moving in that direction of asking all of our new recruits to go through this process. I use the word process. It's a horrible word. It shouldn't be like that. It's actually an enjoyable, reflective experience where you can get very helpful mentoring support from within the company and without. And something that I'd particularly like to mention, which perhaps explains why we've done it this year, it is actually what we're doing here on this call, which is the ability for people to receive that mentoring, to enjoy that mentoring, but also to join talks, webinars, seminars. In a weather company, people are working shifts typically, and it's very, very tricky for individuals to protect the time to do the accreditation piece. Very, very difficult indeed. But I really feel now that because the Society and others are running so many useful online sessions and supporting remote access to support, that this is a time when it becomes easier to engage in accreditation at a time that suits you. Working around your busy life and your complicated life if you're a shift worker. So for that reason alone, I think that's probably the reason why we've thought we can do this.
Great, thank you. Thanks both. And any other thoughts from those that I guess aren't involved in running commercial companies on this? Just the importance of having, I guess, a framework for somebody who's kind of early career, to give them that structure as they move through their career. Is that something that you know resonates with you in your own organisations for yourselves? Sarah, do you want to go?
I was just going to say that I think I'd echo what other people have said around valuing the focus on learning and development and professional standards and maintaining currency. And that's something that as an organisation, the Met Office are quite keen to do across all of our professions, not just in meteorology, but everything we do. And our chief executive is kind of driving this from the top with, she's also qualified in chartered status in more than one way, I think. So she's kind of trying to encourage that across everyone to find an accreditation that works for the role that you're in, and making sure that you have that continual focus on learning and development and maintaining standards and maintaining currency.
Great. There's a bit of a discussion going on in the chat, which I'll try and kind of summarise, and I think there were some questions coming out here. So I guess the question started with, obviously we have accreditation for individuals, but could we have something similar for organisations? So some sort of quality standard, kite mark, or whatever that an organisation that's delivering services would need to provide. And Paul, who obviously was chief exec of the RMetS Society, will remember we did try and do a quality standard project a few years ago. It's probably 10 years ago now. And Paul poses the question: is that something we should revisit? Is the sector ready for a possible revisit of a quality standard for the organisation, not the individuals? And it was kind of led on then by Andrew Eccleston, who also remembers the approach around the quality standards. So I guess 10 or 11 years ago when we looked at this, the timing wasn't right. There wasn't an appetite for it, and we pushed forward with restructuring, introducing the RMet, the registered meteorologist, and moving to a much more competency-based approach for the RMet and the CMet. But maybe it's time to revisit a quality standard. I guess the benefit of a quality standard on an organisation is it starts to kind of show the organisations that are delivering high quality services and against, I guess, the cowboys that aren't. But I don't know what the panel's view are about assessment of an organisation. compared with the assessment of individuals within that organisation? Rich, do you want to go first?
Just to say that I think the problem that you've got is there are many different sizes of organisations. So I work within an organisation which trains its forecasters. So we start, we have to follow from day one. You go through the BIFM process, and that's aligned with our teaching, and then they go through a career trajectory which leads them ultimately to be in a similar role to me, a charge qualified job leading a team of meteorologists, and you go through a series of steps of rungs on that ladder. But that isn't going to necessarily map across to another organisation. And they may assume that the academic institutions that their forecasters or meteorologists come from are hitting the right standards. And that is where I think that you come back around in the full circle, that the RMetS CMetS process comes in, and the onus goes back onto the individual to say, yes, I'm continuing to maintain that standard and keep myself at a standard. I think it would be very difficult to have a one-size-fits-all in that situation.
Great, thanks, Rich. Any other thoughts from the panel?
Always delighted to put the focus on quality, but I think we should always remember as well that our discipline is expanding and drawing in, for example, really welcome expertise from parallel disciplines like machine learning. And so if we're going to do this, then we need to be able to reflect, the valuable contribution that all suppliers can bring to this discipline. So I think that makes it trickier, but always happy to have a focus on quality.
And I think you raised the point earlier, Steve, that the users aren't asking for your employees to be registered or chartered. They're not asking for a quality standard against your organisation, but they are asking you to provide some sort of information around the kind of competency of your employees. And again, the RMet and CMet goes some way to supporting that. But I guess to kind of move this question on, is the community, are your users, your customers, are they asking for RMet and CMet of your employees, or some sort of recognition of him, or asking for a recognition that your organisation itself is high quality, the services that it provides? Is it getting driven from a user perspective?
Yes, as I mentioned, they're not asking for RMet and CMet by name, but they're asking for the equivalent evidence that progress is being made. And there's a process of continuous improvement. That's a phrase that is used a lot, continuous improvement. So how do you demonstrate that? Either through what your individuals are doing or through programs and frameworks that you set up to facilitate that. What many big customers are asking for, of course, are ISO accreditations of all manner of sorts. So, of course, we have to put the focus on quality across the board, not just in terms of the meteorology, but also, of course, in terms of business process. So people are asking for demonstration of quality in all corners of your business, not just for the meteorological component.
Yeah, thank you. Any other thoughts from the panel? Can I just have a quick yes or no? Do you feel a quality standard of organisations, whether it was Met Office, through ITV or any of the broadcasters, Royal Navy, private sector, is there a passion and interest for you guys to see a quality standard introduced? Is that an open door at the moment, or is it a closed door that we'd need to push quite hard at? Simon, do you want to go first, and then I'll come to Laura?
And ISO is definitely something that we may be thinking about in the future, but we turned it around by saying no. If you're going to be a forecaster at Fleetweather, you will be accredited minimum RMet, and as part of a career profile, you need to get to that status by a set time. And so we have a career profile within the company that's linked to status, professionalism, and pay, and externally, when that is presented, that all our staff are accredited. But by and large, in terms of selling that service as an expert service, that delivers. But yeah, not 100% against or for the company maybe having a meteorological accreditation. That's something that we'll definitely look at.
Simon. Laura? You're on mute.
I guess it goes very much back to the previous question of should it be mandatory to have the accreditation, and at ITV, I guess you could say from now on in, everybody would have to have an RMet minimum, but then what about the people who don't already have that? And then that would exclude a large amount of people, or a number of people, from being able to apply for those jobs who would be very competent to do them. So it's what you would miss out on versus what you would gain. So that would be a very difficult thing to think about, but a conversation to be had.
Thank you. Okay, I'll move on to another question. So this is from Shanti Majifia. So can we, I mean, some of the examples that you've given suggest that the organisation requires people to move towards this, but are there any suggestions of how an organisation could encourage individuals to move towards accreditation? So I guess the carrot rather than maybe the stick. I don't know. Any thoughts from the panel about how we might encourage more people within organisations to move towards accreditation? I'm going to start with Sarah on this one, because I think this is probably something the Met Office is doing quite nicely at the moment.
Yeah, so at the moment we have introduced an incentive to for people to accredit to whichever body is relevant or accreditation is relevant to their role. So there is a financial aspect that you can introduce, but it depends how easy that is to do in your own particular company. But also we have encouraged people through applications as well. So once you get to a certain role or a certain point in your career, it becomes part of the job essentials and desirables. It's not often an essential, but it can be a desirable under there, that at the very least you're willing to work towards becoming a chartered or a registered meteorologist, depending on what level of role you're applying for.
Great, thanks. Rich, is there a kind of model within the Royal Navy of how we can encourage more meteorologists to become accredited?
So if I look to the other targets in the Royal Navy, such as our engineers, they're going through a similar process of looking to try and get their engineers accredited for relevant professional bodies. I've engaged with the hydrographic side of our branch, who are looking to start the process of going and aligning, at least getting Royal Navy affiliation with their body. And I'm actually doing the same work at the moment to try and steer the Royal Navy to at least affiliate with the Royal Met Society in the longer term. I think it's a case of often we find that change doesn't happen very quickly in the military, but these opportunities allow us to look outwards, to look at how industry is doing it. So I value, for instance, opportunities like this to hear other people's opinions and how they think their business or organisation might strive to do it. I think it definitely has benefits for my organisation, and I think it is something we would seek to well, personally, I believe we should seek towards, and I know there's quite a few people that are like-minded.
Right, and yeah, Simon.
It's probably worth making the point that within the company we've got other areas. Software development is one. Customer service is another area. We are looking at. We're now in the process of actually copying what we've done on the weather side and taking this accreditation and learning and self-development process in a more recognised, formal way into the other areas of the company. So yes, there's a lot of benefit for doing that sort of stuff.
I'll take Laura first and then Steve. So Laura, away you go.
I mean, guess my thoughts are picking up on what Sarah was saying in a broadcast weather presenter sense, whether it's ITV, BBC or Sky or wherever. Perhaps it would be nicer for the more senior members of the team to then have that qualification or be recognised, particularly if you are training more junior or more level entry team members. And then that way that's something to aspire to, and it's something that the new recruits could look up to and know that that's what they then will aspire to. And then hopefully that will then start this cycle of more and more people having it, because your peers do as well. So that, I guess that could be something that we could look at across forecasting.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, good idea. Steve?
I think what I'd like to say is that we haven't received any pushback yet. And so this doesn't feel like pushing something uphill, I have to say. Quite the opposite. But it only works, of course, if you're willing to provide the mentoring support and also the time to allocate to the accreditation process. So we're very lucky. My predecessor, Jim Bacon, in this role, now almost completely retired. I can't think of a better person to be mentoring the next generation in our company of forecasters. And so Jim's taking on that role and is the friend of the more junior members of staff. And I'm really happy that that process is happening because I think it stands a great chance of succeeding.
Great, yeah, really good point. Okay, I'll move on to a couple more questions. So I'll kind of link these two together. Shanti also asks about how we can become more inclusive of business, particularly those businesses that just have one or two meteorologists working for them. But I think let's broaden that out to thinking about inclusivity on the main. So, when we think about our fellowship and our professional accreditation schemes, how can we make them as inclusive as possible for anybody working in the meteorological sector? And it leads on to a question from Bob Ridaway about how do we break down barriers, so we can encourage more meteorologists to seek accreditation. So it's making it inclusive, it's breaking down barriers. Any thoughts from the panel on this? Steve, you go first.
Well, I think it's Sarah's point earlier, which is that there are many different competencies and skills and pieces and areas of expertise that qualify for these accreditations. And so wherever you're coming from, touching the weather discipline, there's a role for you. You can look through a very long list of areas that you could be contributing something. And I honestly believe that everyone can find at least a couple, and in many cases, a lot more than that. So go for it, is what I would say. Feel that you've got something to offer and that there's something to be recognised.
Great, thanks, Steve. Sarah?
I was just going to say that I think the Society has done quite a lot over the last few years to try and make it a less intimidating process. Because maybe sort of 5-10 years ago, I knew people who were chartered meteorologists, and they described how intimidating the interview was, and so a lot of people I knew were very fearful of applying to become a chartered meteorologist, and I was quite fearful when I applied. But actually, the process was I was going to say really lovely. It wasn't as scary as I thought it was going to be, and the interview wasn't as scary as I thought it was going to be either, because it was focused on the things that I'd done and the things that I knew about. So there was naturally a kind of, meteorology is so large that it can be really intimidating if you think that you're going to have a question about any particular area of meteorology, but to kind of bring it down and close it down to the areas you know about suddenly makes it less intimidating. But I think that there's still work to do about getting that message to people. And I know that I've taken part in things with the Royal Met Soc in the Met Office where we've kind of talked about that a little bit, and the questions that have come up have still been, actually I'm really scared about the interview, what's going to come up, that sort of side of things. So I think the Society have done well to change that perception, but I think there's still more to emphasise, which is just a natural scaredness, I suppose, given the vastness of questions that you could be asked about meteorology.
Yeah, really good point, Sarah. Thanks for that. Laura?
Well, I guess there's a two-prong. There's the getting more people involved and to have the professional qualifications, and then the diversity and inclusion side, like you said. So I was honoured earlier this year to become a fellow, and the plan is very much to do my RMet or CMet. That I am going to be very busy soon, and you will find out why in the very near future. But it's also about leading by example as well. So, a lot of the forecasts I talked to at the Met Office have an RMet or CMet, or within the ITV weather team as well, and talking to them exactly as you said, Sarah, that it's actually really enjoyable. You get so much out of it, as you were saying, Stephen, thinking back to everything else that you've done to get to this point. So that's how the word is spreading. But in a diversity and inclusion sense, thinking about myself as a female, as a TV weather presenter. Initially, when I wanted to study meteorology, I didn't actually ever want to be a TV weather presenter, because everyone's first thing they say is, "Oh, you're going to be a weather girl." And instantly, I just disliked that phrase. And it's still a phrase that comes around all the time. In the last year, an Australian MP had a go at me because I was saying to him that climate change was largely to blame for the wildfires. And he disagreed and called me a ignorant weather girl. And so, having our qualifications to throw back at somebody like, for example, just because I'm a woman, doesn't necessarily mean that I don't know what I'm talking about and I just go, "Ooh, cloud." And I think that that's another thing to be visible as a female in what was largely male-dominated environment, as you saw on your graph, but actually now it's 50-50. So already, you guys are obviously doing the right thing because there's this even split too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think role models are a really key part of this as well, aren't they? Absolutely. Any other thoughts from the panel? Simon?
I think I really should bring out the fact that the program that we've implemented has all happened within 2 years, and as you know, we've got a steady stream of people going through the system, the process, the pipeline, whatever you want to call it. But there's a real sense of pride and achievement when they come out at the other end, and I say that that's at the RMet level. That steps up again when you go to the charter level, but it's not an easy thing to do. There's a lot of work that goes into it, both when on watch and off watch, and there is a real sense of pride and achievement. And with that, it comes a whole load of other things like confidence and all the wider stuff that you can then bolt on. So those are fundamental pieces that sit there in the background behind the accreditation process, on top of everything else that we've sort of covered in the panel already.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. Rich?
It's just to say, I think it's critical to have coaching, mentoring, and access to that within the organisations that are trying to push this forward. That's what's going to enable that kind of inclusivity. And it doesn't matter who you are. If you know someone that you can approach, and I think as we said before, if you can approach someone and understand what's coming, and it doesn't seem so daunting, that's great. And I've had someone this morning who's based up at Prestwick at the moment, who's going to go through his accreditation in the near future, just going, "Oh, Rich, you know a bit about it. You've been through this before. What's it like? What do I need to do?" And hopefully, if the more the organisations embrace this, the more they take a coaching, mentoring kind of attitude, and the more approachable people that have already done the qualifications are, then the more it's snowball effect, isn't it? It's going to build because it becomes more accessible. Not saying that it becomes easier. It just means that the resources are there to support everyone.
Yeah, some really good point. Yes, Steve.
I think back in 1997, when I applied, I did think that when I got the certificate, that was it, because that was my thinking back then. But the reality is, of course, that you don't come out the other end. You temporarily get a certificate, and then you need to maintain it, and you need to keep going with it. And it's a new way of thinking and operating. So that would be my message to everyone: is don't view it as a time-limited activity and then as a big tick. Think of it as how you can sustain it as a really good activity for the long term.
Yeah, and I think that's the real strength of accreditation, because it is about maintaining. It's not like an exam where you pass it and 5 years later you might not be up to date and current in the field, but you've still got that qualification under your belt. Accreditation is about providing evidence that you're maintaining it, and as I say, that's a real strength. So some really important points there. Yes, Simon, I'll take another point from you.
It's probably worth making another observation here, that as basic weather data becomes more freely accessible and available, there is a burgeoning in private weather companies, commercial weather business. The US obviously leads the way, but Europe is fast catching up. And so the accreditation, to me, if you're going to work in the competitive side of meteorology, out there having to earn your money for it rather than being a government or an academic type employee, accreditation is absolutely essential if you want to move between companies, transfer, switch, etc. In the UK, there is certainly in the last 10 years, commercial weather business has grown quite a lot, and therefore you're getting to the stage where you've got people now that will want to change jobs, change companies, and accreditation is an essential part of that process.
Yeah, really good point. And I think particularly with the climate service sector, I mean, that's growing exponentially. I think there's another kind of area that we can support and cover and allow people to develop accreditation within one organisation, but then move across into other organisations as well. So Laura, yes, you've got your hand up.
I guess for myself, who still has yet to do the RMet or the CMet, this has made me realise that I want to do it even more. And I guess if you think about weather folk, meteorologists, weather enthusiasts, we're sort of a funny lot. We do weather all day at work, but then when we come home, we still want to do weather. Anytime I meet up with my weather friends, there's always weather chat, climate chat, this chat. And so the fact that you say you just keep learning, it's not like I'm sure that accountants have to be chartered. They don't go home and do Sudoku every evening, for the crack of it. So I guess it's just a natural thing that we would all want to do because it just keeps up your level of enthusiasm. I mean, the amount of extra reading I do every day, every week on new stuff that's coming out is crazy. Probably wasted a lot of my time and I could have already got it.
Oh, absolutely. And that's, I think the whole point is the evidence is just there. It's happening because you are keeping yourself up to date. It's just capturing that and putting it in an application. So yes, go for it. We've converted Laura to the RMet CMet. That's job done. Great. And I think there's some really valid points come out there. The benefit of having role models, the changing perception, again, kind of people's perception of what the process is and maybe how it used to be. There's a comment in the chat about, introducing that kind of grandfather approach. So somebody who can mentor and bring you through, to take you through the process, to explain the process, to introduce you to the process, and even maybe streamline the process. And again, that's something we're definitely looking at. So if you work within an organisation that has lots of these processes already in place, can we streamline that against what we're looking for with the RMet and CMet? I'm going to try and squeeze one more question in. So this is about how we can, I guess, improve on communication to promote accreditation as something that's really valuable both to individuals but organisations, and how can we make sure there's a greater appreciation of this across the whole of the sector, whether it's people within public and private sector or those that are using weather services. So how do we get that message out about, I mean, again, there's a lot of buzz from you just chatting on the panel, but how do we get that message out to the wider sector so that, people recognise the real value of professional accreditation? Anybody want to take that first? Steve?
Well, I think sometimes we speak about this as if we're the only discipline doing it. But, we're a little late to the party, actually, and this is happening widely, of course, in many areas. So I think pointing to what others are doing and what they've achieved with it is something that we can do more of, so that we just realise that this is normal.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely, learning from other sectors that are kind of doing this all the time. It's not something that's just unique to us, is it? Laura?
I guess one of the most obvious ways is in public-facing interactions. So, especially if you were to be on Good Morning Britain, Liz, you should ask for all of your letters to be after your name, so that the more often these things are seen, the more often people ask, what does that mean? And then the more they understand, and then it's leading by example and everybody then understanding.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. The more people use their postnominals, and I've seen that play out. Somebody has moved from, actually not just an organisation, but to a completely new field of meteorology, and has their postnominals after their name, and somebody's said, oh, what does that RMet or CMet mean? And the discussion starts, and then that organisation kind of is aware and suddenly recognises the value. So I think the use of postnominals can certainly help. Any other thoughts from the panel? Yes, Simon.
Liz, I think it's probably worth also pointing out that if you look at it from a marine forecaster perspective and ship routing, the rules and regulations are changing, and we still continue to lose ships at sea because of weather. and weather routing services exist and they happen out there routinely, but we still lose ships. So I actually see increasing regulation coming over the horizon from the relevant bodies, whether it's the IMO or the WMO, which are going to, I think, hard line that certain people in certain roles must have certain qualifications or be accredited in certain areas and subjects. And while it hasn't necessarily happened yet, I mean, I think on the commercial aviation side, the weather forecasting is pretty strict on standards and things, and that I think is certainly going to walk across into the marine side. But yes, I actually see probably more regulation and framework control coming over the horizon. So really, the message there is get in there ahead of it before you have to do it.
Great, thanks, Simon. I'm going to come to each of the panel members very quickly as we wrap up, just with a kind of 10 seconds, if you can, just really to kind of summarise, you know, the importance of fellowship or professional accreditation to you and your organisation. But before I come to you, I'm just going to pick up one point from Tony about, could we widen the scope of accreditation for enthusiasts, not just those working directly in meteorology? And I guess there is an opportunity for people to apply for RMet and CMet if they're in an interdisciplinary role. But if you're not working in meteorology at all, really the fellowship is probably the best route to take. And we've relaunched the fellowship in the last couple of years to allow people who don't work in meteorology to still be able to apply for fellowship. So that would be something I'd encourage. Right, I'm going to whiz round. So 10 seconds each. Try and keep to time, guys. Start with Simon.
Don't be scared by it. Don't be put off by it. Find a sponsor. It's absolutely essential and it'll help you go forward.
Perfect. Thank you. Laura.
For me and my organisation at ITV, everybody was really excited that I got it. It means that they know that I've got support to help me with lots of other things now that weather has expanded into other areas, and I will now look for support and guidance from others to help me.
Great. Thanks, Laura. Steve?
I think during this period of pandemic, we've all been reflecting a lot on what we do, what we achieve, what we can do different. And accreditation is a good example of something that we can capitalise on and do different.
Perfect. Thank you. Sarah?
So from a Met Office perspective, accreditation is really great for because it forces you to maintain your currency and think about professional development and that side of things. And from a personal perspective, I like being able to demonstrate my professional capability to people outside my organisation who've never come across meteorology before.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Rich?
I think critically it's about leadership. It's about achieving a standard and maintaining a standard and getting your team to follow in that route. Looking outside of your little area of meteorology or your company to the bigger picture for best practice outside of that, and engaging with the community. And finally, my geeky part of personal interest, I love my sailing. I got to go on a great webinar at the end of last year with the British Sailing Team's forecaster. I found that absolutely fascinating. And so, yeah, for me, if I can get a tactical advantage on the racecourse out of it on the side, that's great.
Brilliant. And Sharon, do you want to say a few final words to close us off?
Just thank you so much, panel, for a really, really interesting discussion that's been supported by some of the comments. From my perspective, it's given me a lot to work with the accreditation board, but also just one final reminder that we do have lots of support. We do have the mentors, we do have the guidance. So please, if you want to, just get in touch and we'll see what we can do to help. But thank you. It's been great.
Yeah, so big thank you from me to Simon, Laura, Steve, Sarah, Rich and Sharon. So really interesting discussion, and apologies for overrunning by a few minutes, but thank you, everybody. Bye for now.
Thank you very much. Bye.